When she was informed her sister-in-law hadn't been seen in several days, Emily Coombes knew something was wrong. Her suspicions only grew when she encountered her nephews, who were adamant their mother had simply gone out of town and left them to their own devices. Despite her nephew's protests, Emily managed to force her way inside their home, but nothing could have prepared her for the horror that lay within. In this episode of Well I Never, the story of Robert Coombes, the boy responsible for a brutal crime that would later be dubbed the Plaistow Horror. It was 1895 and England was enjoying a very hot summer, which is probably why nobody paid very much attention to what the Coombes boys were doing. 13-year-old Robert and 12-year-old Nathaniel spent most of their days roaming the streets of East London's Docklands. The Coombes family was well known in the area. Its patriarch, Robert Senior, worked as a purser and chief steward for the National Steamship Company, a job that required him to frequently be away from home, travelling back and forth across the Atlantic. He was a hard worker who did all he could to provide for his wife, Emily, and their 2 sons. The couple settled into a terraced house, 35 Cave Road here in Plaistow, a poor working-class neighbourhood located in East London's largest borough. The pair were well liked by their neighbours, being described as very pleasant, cheerful people. Emily, in particular, was known to be an exemplary wife and mother, and also a careful housewife. These sentiments, however, would not be extended to the Coombes boys. Even as they excelled in school, their teachers sometimes regarded them as precocious and rude. They were described by their neighbours as being sullen and morose, resembling neither of their parents. Both Robert and Nathaniel were said to be deceitful and dishonest in small things, which led to some locals being critical of their mother for being too lenient. On July the 5th, 1895, Robert Senior said goodbye to his 37-year-old wife and 2 sons before heading to the docks to board the steamship France, which was scheduled to set sail for New York City that day. Before departure, he made sure he left Emily enough money to cover all her household expenses, promising her he would be back in a few weeks with a hefty paycheck. 3 days later, his sons woke up early to head to St John's Wood in North London, where they planned to watch a highly anticipated cricket match at Lord's Cricket Ground. Before leaving, Robert gave his neighbour James Robertson a half-sovereign and asked if he would mind paying the rent for them that day. When James asked about the boy's mother, Robert replied, quote, "We had a telegram late last night from Liverpool and she is going there. We've had a rich uncle die in Africa and Auntie wants to see Ma." End quote. When asked if she had already left, he stated that she hadn't, as she had had a fit, but maybe she will see Mrs. Robertson before she leaves. With that, the boys went on their way. Emily Coombes was known to frequently travel to the northwest of England, where her wealthy older sister lived with their mother. Because of this, nobody in the neighbourhood was initially alarmed by her absence, but as days went by without them seeing her, they began to grow suspicious. Some asked her sons, worried about her well-being. However, both Robert and Nathaniel were adamant that their mother was fine and had simply left town temporarily. The boys spent the next few days out and about in London. First, to watch a play at the Theatre Royal in Stratford, then to the Pier Hill Fairground, where they spent several hours fishing. They were accompanied by 39-year-old John Fox, a friend of their father's who also worked for the National Steamship Company. He was said to be mentally challenged, which some believe was the reason why he didn't question Robert when asked to pawn some of the family's valuables, including a gold pocket watch that belonged to Robert Senior. During this time, the Coombes boys and Fox continued living at the small house in Plaistow, using the back parlour as their bedroom. When their funds began running low, Robert came up with a money-making scheme that involved asking for an advance of £4, roughly £420 today, from John Hewson, the chief cashier of the National Steamship Company. In his letter, he wrote that his mother was very sick and needed to pay an expensive doctor's bill. Hewson, however, was suspicious and refused to hand over the money. By then, the neighbours were no longer able to ignore their suspicions. They reached out to Emily's sister-in-law, who, coincidentally, was also named Emily Coombes. On July 15, 1895, she arrived at the family's home in Plaistow, accompanied by her friend Mary Jane Burridge. They tried their best to enter the house, but were turned away by folks who told them Emily was away on holiday before closing the door. At that moment, the Coombes boys arrived at the scene and were asked about their mother's whereabouts. Perhaps forgetting his previous tale, Robert explained that a rich aunt had died and had left them a lot of money. The pair then ran off into these plain fields. However, the story Robert told failed to satisfy the women, and 2 days later, on July the 17th, they returned to the property. This time around, they were able to get inside, where they found Fox and the two boys playing cards. Once again, Emily confronted Robert, asking him where his mother was. He replied that she was at a friend's house and he would take Emily to see her. The worried and frustrated sister-in-law put her foot down, telling Robert, "Your mother is in this house and I will not leave until the police arrive." According to the book, The Wicked Boy by Kate Summerscale, what happened next was simply horrifying. Quote, "Mary Jane and Aunt Emily went upstairs, but when they tried to force the door, found that it would not give. They sent someone to fetch a spare key from the landlady. The key was brought and Aunt Emily opened the door to the bedroom. There, she saw the form of a woman lying on the bed, the face covered by a sheet and a pillow. Overcome by the smell of rotting flesh, she drew back and sent Mary Jane Burridge and her son to find a policeman." End quote. The Burridges immediately alerted Constable Robert Thwart, who rushed to the scene of the crime and turned down the bedsheets, uncovering Emily Coombes' decomposing body riddled with maggots. He also saw a knife on the bed and a truncheon on the floor, which he correctly assumed were the murder weapons. Upon seeing the corpse of her sister-in-law, Aunt Emily turned to her nephew and told him, quote, "You're a bad, wicked boy. You knew your ma was dead in the room and you ought to have told me." End quote. In response, Robert claimed that his mother had beaten his younger brother for stealing food and had threatened to do the same to him. Afterward, Nathaniel allegedly told him that he wanted to stab her but couldn't, and so asked him to do it instead. Robert readily agreed, using the knife that Constable Thwart had found on the bed. He also confessed to pawning his family's valuables, saying that he had asked the impressionable John Fox to pledge in his place, since pawnbrokers didn't usually transact with children. While some police officers interviewed Robert, others went after his younger brother, who had managed to escape amid the chaos. Nathaniel was caught and brought back to Plaistow the same afternoon. When questioned, he claimed that he had nothing to do with the murder and that his brother had stabbed their mother while he was asleep in bed. The news of Emily Coombes' murder sent shockwaves across town, although locals were more horrified by the fact that her sons had stayed in the house and continued with their daily routine despite her body decomposing just a few meters away. The way that Robert described killing his mother was also chilling. By all accounts, his confession was straightforward and free from any emotion. It stated that after the murder, he had sprinkled lye over the body in an attempt to subdue the smell. Since the surrounding fields were being sprayed with fertilizer, This also helped mask the putrid scent. Thanks to the Children's Act of 1889, courts at the time defined children as any boy under the age of 14 and any girl under 16. While Robert and Nathaniel fell under this description, it was decided that they would still be held criminally responsible for their mother's murder, if it was proven that they were capable of discerning between right and wrong. The Coombes boys and John Fox were first tried at the West Ham Magistrates Court, which was responsible for determining whether they should be handed over to the Central Criminal Court at the Old Bailey to be tried for capital crimes. During the proceedings, Prosecutor Guy Stevenson petitioned for Nathaniel to be discharged and considered a witness instead. Surprisingly, his request was granted. Nathaniel was reportedly terrified when he took to the stand and even sobbed while being questioned by Magistrate Ernest Bagley. The hearing ended after his testimony with the court ruling that Robert and Fox would both be tried for capital crimes. It was said that Robert was laughing as he was put into a cab and driven back to the Holloway prison where he had been staying since his arrest. Meanwhile, his younger brother was handed over to their mother's older sister. On September 16th, nearly 2 months after the gruesome discovery was made, the trial began at the Old Bailey in central London. During the proceedings, several witnesses were called to discuss Robert's mental health. Among them, his father, Robert Sr., who testified that his son regularly experienced debilitating headaches. He further stated that Robert had a difficult birth, with the doctors using so much force during his delivery that their medical instruments left permanent marks on his temples. This was corroborated by the family's physician, Dr. John Joseph Griffin, who also took the stand. Robert was very calm during his trial, even pleading guilty as his charges were being read out. However, his counsel, William Grantham, intervened, instructing him to plead not guilty. Robert's calmness may have stemmed from the fact that he was no stranger to courts. When he was 12, he had made his way to the Essex Assizes on his own to watch the trial of murderer James Reed. During his own trial, besides Robert Sr. and Nathaniel, Police Inspector George Gilbert also took the stand, testifying that he had uncovered a huge collection of penny dreadfuls while investigating the family home. At the time, penny dreadfuls referred to cheap precursors to comic books that published sensational stories, usually about detectives, criminals, or the supernatural. Robert was a big fan of these magazines, and for some, his obsession with such violent literature explained why he had been capable of brutally murdering his mother without feeling a shred of remorse afterward. It was said that Robert appeared to find this testimony ridiculous. According to the Wicked Boy, quote, "During Gilbert's evidence, Robert quietly laughed to himself. He began to make comical, grotesque faces at both the inspector and the judge. He stuck out his tongue at Justice Kennedy, who looked at him severely." End quote. The mocking and callous behaviour that Robert exhibited throughout the trial extended to his time in his cell, where he reportedly sang, whistled and frequently mocked the officers watching over him. More chilling, though, was the testimony provided by George Edward Walker, the medical officer of Holloway Prison, who had been in charge of investigating his mental health. During his time on the stand, Walker produced a letter that Robert had written to one of his neighbours, part of which stated, quote, "I think I will get hung, but I do not care as long as I get a good breakfast before they hang me. If they do not hang me, I think I will commit suicide. That will do just as well. I will strangle myself. I hope you're all well." End quote. But 13-year-old Robert was wrong. In the end, the jury found him guilty of murdering his mother, but insane when he committed the act. And so, he was taken to Broadmoor Hospital in Berkshire, England, a secure psychiatric facility where he was to be held indefinitely. Fox was found not guilty. In 1912, at the age of 30, Robert Coombes was finally allowed to walk free. Upon his release, he emigrated to Australia, following in the footsteps of his younger brother Nathaniel. When World War I was declared, he enlisted and served as a stretcher-bearer in the Gallipoli campaign, where he was hit twice with shrapnel while carrying his fellow soldiers to safety. This led to him receiving the Military Medal for Conspicuous Bravery in the Field in 1916. After the war, Robert moved to New South Wales, where he led a quiet life as a farmer, milking cows and growing vegetables. He also taught music to the village children and was said to have taken in an 11-year-old boy named Harry Mulville, who was being abused by his stepfather. For the next 6 years, the two of them lived together. When World War II broke out in 1939, Robert enlisted again, even though he was already in his mid-50s. However, he was medically discharged before he could even set foot overseas. On May the 7th, 1949, he passed away, aged 65. Everything he owned, he willed to his adopted son, Harry Mulville. Right then. Take care, and I'll see you next time with another story to make you say, well, I never.